Hello everyone, my name is Jody Brandon. Welcome to Kids Discovering History. Now, you might have seen this in your favorite cartoon on Saturday morning. Usually, when someone comes up with a brilliant idea, a light bulb pops up over their head, like this. Well, there's a good reason for that. The electric light bulb was one of the greatest ideas of all time. The man who invented the light bulb also invented the phonograph, which was what music was played on before the invention of the CD players we use today. That very same man also invented motion pictures. In fact, he had so many brilliant ideas that he is considered today to be the greatest inventor the world has ever known. His name was Thomas Edison, and I have a pretty good idea that you're all going to enjoy this program.
In 1847, there were no radios, no television, and no automobiles. No one had ever heard of airplanes, motion pictures, phonographs, or even light bulbs. It was a world that would seem quite foreign to us today. This was what the world was like when Thomas Edison was born. It would not stay that way for long. In his lifetime, Edison would be granted more than 1,000 patents for his inventions, many of which revolutionized the world in which we live. Widely acclaimed as the greatest inventor in the modern age, Edison was also a manufacturer, a businessman, and a founder of organized research. We now present the story of Thomas Edison and his life of invention. He was born Thomas Alva Edison on February 11, 1847, in Milan, Ohio. He was the seventh and last child of Samuel and Nancy Edison. After his father's timber business failed, he and his family moved to Port Huron, Michigan. At age 7, Edison caught scarlet fever, which would leave him hard of hearing for the rest of his life. The following year, he entered school for the first time. His formal education, however, only lasted 3 months. He was unable to adapt himself to the routine of school and decided to quit. His mother, a former teacher, began to teach young Edison at home. As early as 9 years old, Edison was performing scientific experiments he'd read about in chemistry and physics books. He soon set up his own laboratory in his family's cellar. Needing money for his experiments, Edison found work as a newspaper and candy salesman on the Grand Trunk Railway when he was 12 years old. To save time for his experiments, Edison moved his cellar laboratory to a spare freight car on the train. At age 15, he bought a printing press and began to publish a weekly newspaper for the train's passengers called the Grand Trunk Herald. Edison printed the newspaper in the same freight car that served as his laboratory. For saving the life of the station master's child from an oncoming train, Edison was rewarded by being taught telegraphy. He learned it quite quickly, and soon young Edison was the telegraph operator for Port Huron. Beginning at age 17, Edison roamed the United States and Canada to work as a telegrapher wherever the wages were the highest. He worked mostly at night, so he could continue his many experiments during the day. In 1868, Edison took a job with Western Union Telegraph in Boston. It was while working here that Edison first read Experimental Researches in Electricity by Michael Faraday. Like Edison, Faraday was a self-taught scientist and experimenter. Edison was quite encouraged by what he had read. Edison began to write down his many ideas and record the results of his experiments in notebooks. Edison applied for his first patent for an invention in October 1868. It was an electric vote counter intended for the United States Congress. Members of Congress, however, were reluctant to use it. His first commercial invention was a failure. Edison swore from that day on that he would never invent anything that people do not want. Edison left Western Union to work for a telegraph instrument maker. It was here that he invented the stock ticker. Being an adaptation of the telegraph, it sent the latest stock prices electrically along wires to printers in various offices. Although it was an immediate success, he did not receive enough money to pay for the expenses he had incurred while inventing it. Edison left Boston penniless in 1869. He arrived in New York and was given a job at Law's Gold Indicator Company. Here, he continued to work on new ways for sending gold and stock prices between offices. In 1870, Western Union paid Edison the unheard-of sum of $40,000 for the patent to an improved stock ticker. With his newfound wealth, Edison decided to set up his own factory in Newark, New Jersey, and began to manufacture stock tickers and other devices. On Christmas Day in 1871, Edison married Mary Stilwell, a 16-year-old worker at his factory. They would have 3 children together. In 1873, Edison devised a diplex telegraph, which could send 2 messages simultaneously over 1 wire in the same direction. The following year, he invented the quadruplex telegraph, which was capable of sending 4 simultaneous messages over 1 wire. In 1876, Edison and his family moved to Menlo Park, New Jersey, where he established his invention factory. Its sole purpose was testing, improving, and inventing useful commercial products. It was the world's first research and development facility. Edison and over 20 of his best workers, known as the Insomnia Squad, toiled day and night on his inventions. Edison himself would only sleep when he found it absolutely necessary, and oftentimes it would be on his office desk for just a nap. The first important product to come from his invention factory was the carbon telephone transmitter. This device greatly improved the clarity and range of Alexander Graham Bell's original invention. It was while he was working on the telephone transmitter that Edison wondered if it was possible to record the human voice. Edison invented a machine that connected a telephone diaphragm to an embossing needle used for a telegraph repeater machine. This needle would be pressed into paper as Edison spoke into the diaphragm. This caused small dents in the paper. When the paper was pulled back through the machine, it moved the needle, which in turn vibrated the diaphragm and played Edison's voice back to him. What Thomas Edison had just invented was the world's first phonograph. Edison himself considered it his favorite invention. Edison and his crew worked feverishly on improving his initial designs. He first tried devices using grooved cylinders of wax and chalk, but soon found them inadequate. In December of 1877, he had one of his colleagues build a phonograph using tin foil wrapped around a metal cylinder. Edison tested it out. He recited the nursery rhyme of "Mary Had a Little Lamb" into the phonograph. Edison decided to play back his recording to a small group of witnesses. All around him were in disbelief when they heard Edison's voice reproduced from the machine. Edison became an instant celebrity. Crowds of reporters would come to the invention factory to hear demonstrations. President Rutherford B. Hayes even called upon Edison to demonstrate the phonograph at the White House. Edison's factory was fast becoming a popular tourist attraction, and Edison himself was soon being referred to as the Wizard of Menlo Park. Besides being a brilliant inventor, he was also a smart businessman. Not only did Edison manufacture and sell phonographs, he also produced the recordings to be played on them. His invention from 1877 paved the way for the compact discs and stereo systems we now use today.
Thomas Edison's phonograph was indeed a miraculous invention, but his greatest achievement, the incandescent lamp, was right around the corner.
Edison was not the first to invent electric lighting. The arc lamp, which had been around for decades, was simply too bright and too expensive to be used inside homes and offices. Remember, homes in the 1870s were still being lighted by candles or oil lamps. Unlike previous inventors of electric lighting, Edison envisioned not merely an electric light, but a complete lighting system that could compete with the popular gas light of the day. Edison believed that the key to the system was a lamp having a high-resistance, hair-like filament, instead of the low-resistance wires and rods used by rival inventors. He first tried using a filament made of platinum. He encased the filament in a glass bulb and created a vacuum by pumping out the air. This would enable the filament to last much longer. The invention factory continued to experiment with hundreds of materials to find the perfect filament. They decided to give up on a metal and made a filament from carbonized cotton thread. On October 22, 1879, this new bulb burned for 40 hours. Edison immediately applied for a patent. On New Year's Eve, 1879, the houses and streets of Menlo Park, New Jersey, were being lit by 30 of Edison's new light bulbs. In 1880, he began using filaments made from bamboo and eventually settled on using cellulose. Now that Edison had invented and improved upon the light bulb, he set out to work on a system to supply electricity to the houses and offices that needed it. With the help of Francis R. Upton, one of his employees, he began to improve on the source of electricity itself, the generator. He made existing generators twice as efficient as they were to provide electricity for his bulbs. By the early 1880s, there were 5 electric light companies, including Edison's, lighting up New York. His factory provided the lighting for the first French electrical exposition in Paris. It was a huge success. Edison began setting up electric light companies all throughout Europe. In 1882, Edison was in London exhibiting his lighting display at the Crystal Palace. The light bulb was sweeping the world, and everybody wanted them. In 1882 alone, more than 100,000 light bulbs were manufactured. On September 4th of that year, Edison opened his first commercial power station on Pearl Street in New York City. On opening day, it had under 100 customers, but was able to supply enough electricity to light 1,200 bulbs. This station marked the beginning of the electric lighting industry in America. To amuse himself, Edison built an electric railroad at Menlo Park. The electric train he built for it could achieve a speed of 40 miles an hour. Eventually, the city of New York adopted Edison's ideas and began to use electric engines on their underground tracks. His experiments with electric trains were the last he made at Menlo Park. Tragedy struck the Edison family in 1884 when his wife, Mary, died of typhoid. More bad luck was to follow as Edison began a series of legal battles to stop others from copying his work. Edison's legal battles would take more than 10 years and cost him more than $2 million before they were finally resolved. In 1886, some 2 years after Mary's death, Edison married Mina Miller, and together they had 3 children. Deciding it was time for a change, he purchased Glenmont, a house in West Orange, New Jersey. He also built new factories and laboratories that were 10 times bigger than those at Menlo Park. Edison and his men continued to improve on the phonograph and even invented the world's first talking doll. The dolls were equipped with tiny phonographs inside them which played nursery rhymes. Another invention to come from the West Orange factory was the Ediphone, the precursor to the dictaphone. This small machine recorded speech which could be typed later. This invention was to help thousands of secretaries all over the world. In 1888, Edison was awarded yet another patent. He and his assistant, William Dixon, developed a device that Edison called a kinetoscope. It was a cabinet containing a strip of film with a sequence of pictures on it. A small hole inside the cabinet allowed the viewer to watch the film one picture at a time. This sequence created the illusion of movement in the pictures. Thus, the term motion pictures was born. Being a businessman, Edison quickly added a coin drop to his invention so he could profit from it. The cost of viewing one of Edison's motion pictures? 5 cents. Using film developed by his friend George Eastman, Edison set out to produce a number of motion pictures to be used with his new invention. He constructed the world's first motion picture studio and called it the Black Maria. This studio was a 50-foot-long wooden structure that could be turned on a giant pivot so that it always faced the sun. Good lighting was essential to producing quality films. Edison's first movies depicted such things as a man sneezing, a woman dancing, and even a boxing match featuring heavyweight champion of the world, Jim Corbett. One of his first motion pictures to tell a narrative story was the short film entitled Life of an American Fireman. Edison and his co-workers even attempted to produce the world's first motion picture with sound by connecting a phonograph to a kinetograph, the first movie camera. This system, however, proved inadequate. Real talking pictures would not be produced until 1927. In his later years, Edison became good friends with fellow inventor Henry Ford. Ford had developed and manufactured the world's first affordable automobiles. Edison and Ford would take vacations together in the countryside. However, the press would follow them wherever they went. The press coverage became so intense that the two men eventually had to stop vacationing together. On one of their last vacations, they were joined by none other than the President of the United States, Warren G. Harding. Edison is the one taking a nap on the ground. It was during one of these many trips that Ford's friend Harvey Firestone joined him. Firestone was a rubber manufacturer who made tires for Ford's automobiles. Ford and Firestone expressed worries about a shortage of rubber for their tires and asked Edison if he could develop an alternative source for rubber. In 1927, Edison set out to find this alternate source. By crossbreeding, Edison developed a goldenrod plant 14 feet tall, which yielded 12% latex. Unfortunately, Edison's rubber was expensive to make and not as good as the rubber imported from the tropics. Undaunted, Edison continued his search for cheap, quality rubber. These would be his last experiments. 1929 marked the 50th anniversary of the invention of the light bulb. To honor his friend, Henry Ford arranged a special ceremony for the occasion. At his automobile factory in Dearborn, Michigan, Ford reconstructed Edison's entire Menlo Park laboratory. The 82-year-old Edison was deeply touched by this honor. The ceremony would be Edison's last public appearance. Thomas Edison died on October 18, 1931, at the age of 84. To honor the great inventor, lights across America were turned off 1 full minute on October 21, 1931, 3 days after his death. Edison was buried at Roosevelt Cemetery, but was later moved to his estate at Glenmont, next to the grave of his second wife, Mina. Edison's contributions to the world cannot be overstated. His phonograph was responsible for starting the first recording company, and the recording industry, for that matter. His electric light company eventually became General Electric, one of the world's largest industrial manufacturers. His kinetoscope was responsible for creating the motion picture industry. Whenever we view a movie in the theater or at home, we have Thomas Alva Edison to thank. Edison was also responsible in part for developing the rechargeable alkaline storage battery. It was powerful enough to run a car. The batteries we use today are quite similar to the ones that Edison invented nearly a century ago. Out of the 1,093 patents awarded to Edison during his lifetime, some were successful, some were not, and some revolutionized the world. His invention factory at Menlo Park established the practice of research and development facilities used by most modern-day companies. Edison himself became a national folk hero before his death in 1931, and throughout the world he was frequently honored for his contributions. In 1878, he was appointed Chevalier of the Legion of Honor of France, and in 1889, he was made Commander of the Legion of Honor. In 1892, he was awarded the Albert Medal of the Society of Arts of Great Britain. In 1928, he received the Congressional Gold Medal, quote, for development and application of inventions that have revolutionized civilization in the last century. In 1938, a memorial was lighted in Menlo Park to mark the 91st anniversary of Edison's birth. The bulb at the top uses 5,200 watts of electricity to operate. In 1955, his West Orange home and laboratory were established as the Edison National Historic Site. There is no such thing as genius, Edison had been quoted to say. What people choose to call genius is simply hard work, 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. The world in which Thomas Edison was born was a dramatically different place when he died. In a way, Thomas Edison invented the 20th century, and the world is forever grateful for his life of invention.
Well, kids, I hope you all enjoyed our history lesson for today. Next time any of you watch a great movie, play your favorite CD, or read a book by the light of a lamp, remember to thank Thomas Edison for making the world a lot more fun to live in.